Snow slammed against the windshield of Officer Daniel Harris's patrol SUV, the headlights slicing through a white curtain of swirling flakes. It was supposed to be nothing more than a routine call, a suspicious pickup truck reported near Timberline Ridge, but Daniel knew that in Pine Hollow, routine could turn dangerous in an instant. A veteran K9 handler, Daniel was calm under pressure, his instincts razor sharp. In the back seat, his two loyal German shepherds, Ranger and Ghost, sat silent and watchful. They trusted him completely, and he trusted them with his life. At 9:42 p.m., his voice crackled over the radio. Approaching vehicle now. Plates are partially buried. I'm checking it out on foot. Static swallowed the rest. It was the last anyone heard from him. When backup arrived, the scene was wrong in every way. The SUV sat with its engine idling, driver's door hanging open, radio hissing. Snow around the vehicle was trampled with boot prints leading into the forest before stopping abruptly, as if the person who made them had simply vanished. But the most chilling detail was in the back seat. Ranger and Ghost were gone. Within minutes, a blizzard swallowed the trail, and an icy dread spread through the search team. Whatever happened out there, the clock was already ticking. The search team fanned out under the blizzard's assault, their flashlights cutting thin beams through the snow-choked darkness. Sergeant Mark Dawson, Daniel's closest friend, was calling out over the wind when a movement in the tree line caught his eye. Two dark shapes burst from the forest, Ranger and Ghost, their fur dusted white, their breath steaming in the frigid air. They didn't slow, didn't look back, and most chilling of all, they ignored every command barked at them. "They've got his scent," Mark shouted over the storm. The dogs weren't running blindly. Their heads stayed low, noses cutting through the drifts, tails stiff with urgency. They wove between pine trunks, leaping over fallen branches, barking sharp and fast, like a code only they understood. The officers followed, boots sinking into knee-deep snow lungs, burning from the cold. Every so often, Ranger would pause, glancing over his shoulder to make sure the humans were still coming, then plunge ahead. Ghost darted ahead in zigzags, pushing deeper into the darkness. Mark's gut twisted. They weren't just tracking, they were racing against something dangerous. The storm seemed to close in, tighter around them, muffling sound, hiding the forest's secrets. Somewhere in the white void ahead, the dogs barked in unison, a high, urgent tone that made every man in the team break into a run. They had found something, and Mark prayed it wasn't too late. The barking grew louder, sharper, until the team broke through a wall of snow-laden branches into a small clearing. There, under the shadow of a massive pine, Ranger and Ghost were frantic, circling, pawing, and snapping at thick ropes lashed around the trunk. Mark's breath caught. Slumped against the tree, barely recognizable under the frost clinging to his uniform, was Daniel Harris. His head lolled to the side, a thin ribbon of blood tracing from his temple down to his jaw. His arms were bound tightly behind him, rope cutting into his wrists, and his face was pale, too pale. Daniel Mark dropped to his knees, gloves fumbling with the knots. The cold bit into his fingers, but the ropes were wet and frozen solid. Ghost growled low, tugging at the bindings with his teeth, while Ranger pressed himself against Daniel's chest as if trying to share his body heat. Daniel's eyes fluttered open for a second, his breath ragged. "You found me?" He rasped, his voice almost lost in the storm. Mark gritted his teeth. "We're not losing you. Not tonight." The other officers fanned out, scanning the tree line with their flashlights. The snow swallowed most of the light, but Mark had the distinct feeling they were being watched. Ranger's ears pinned back, a low rumble in his throat. Whatever had happened here, whoever had done this, they could still be close. And the blizzard wasn't letting up. The ropes finally gave way under Mark's knife, and Daniel sagged forward into his arms. His uniform was soaked through his body, trembling violently from the cold. When Mark pressed two fingers to his neck, relief washed over him. There was a pulse, but it was weak, fading with each passing second. Medic Mark's shout was ripped apart by the wind. The rest of the team was already moving in, pulling blankets from their packs, wrapping Daniel as tightly as they could. But the snow was relentless, now falling so thick it blurred the edges of the world. Ranger refused to leave Daniel's side, curling himself against his legs, while Ghost trotted in a tight circle around them, barking at anyone who got too close, as if daring the storm, or whoever had done this to try again. "We can't wait for the stretcher," an officer yelled. Visibility 0, the chopper can't land in this. Mark looked toward the trail they had carved coming in. It was already vanishing under a fresh layer of snow. If they didn't move now, they'd lose the path entirely. Form a shield, Mark ordered. 4 officers stepped into position, creating a windbreak. He and another officer hoisted Daniel between them, his boots dragging in the snow. Every step was a battle. The cold gnawed at exposed skin, and the weight of the man they were carrying seemed to grow heavier with each yard. Ghost darted ahead, barking sharply while Ranger stayed pressed against Daniel's thigh, nudging him whenever his head dipped forward. "Stay with me, partner," Mark muttered through chattering teeth. But as the lights of their cruisers finally flickered through the storm, Daniel's body went limp. Daniel's sudden collapse sent a jolt of panic through the group. Mark lowered him gently into the snow, ignoring the icy burn seeping through his knees. "Daniel! Hey, stay with me!" he shouted, slapping his partner's cheek lightly. Ranger whined, pawing at Daniel's arm, while Ghost threw his head back and let out a piercing howl that cut straight through the roar of the storm. It was a desperate, commanding cry for help. The paramedics were still minutes away, slogging through the blizzard with their gear. Mark ripped off his own jacket, draping it over Daniel, and leaned close so his voice wouldn't be lost in the wind. "You're not going anywhere, you hear me? Not after what we just went through." Daniel's eyelids fluttered, but his gaze was unfocused. His lips moved, barely forming the words, "My boys. They didn't leave me." Mark's throat tightened. "No, they didn't. And neither will I." When the medics finally arrived, they moved fast oxygen mask over Daniel's face, hot packs tucked under his arms and against his chest. Vitals checked and rechecked. One medic glanced up at Mark, her expression grave. If those dogs hadn't found him when they did, he wouldn't have made it another hour. Even as they loaded Daniel onto the stretcher, Ranger and Ghost refused to back away. Ghost pressed his muzzle to Daniel's hand, while Ranger planted himself at the foot of the stretcher, muscles tense, eyes locked on his partner. Mark gave a quick nod to the medics. "Let them stay close. They've earned it." The team began the slow march back toward the cruisers, the storm clawing at every step. But this time, with Ranger and Ghost, guarding the way it felt like nothing could stop them. 3 days later, the steady beeping of hospital monitors was the only sound in the quiet room. Daniel lay propped against a stack of pillows, his skin no longer ghostly pale, though his movements were still slow and weak. The doctors called it a miracle surviving the storm, the cold, and whatever ordeal had left him tied to that tree. But Daniel knew the truth. It wasn't luck. It was loyalty. The door creaked open, and in bounded Ranger and Ghost tails, wagging nails clicking against the tile floor. For a moment, the tough K9 handler's face crumpled into something raw and unguarded. "My boys," he whispered. Ranger leapt to the edge of the bed, pressing his head into Daniel's chest, while Ghost shoved his nose under Daniel's hand, demanding scratches. Daniel's voice cracked. "You didn't give up on me. You found me." Mark stood in the doorway, arms crossed, but eyes glassy. They wouldn't stop. Not until they had you back. A week later, the department held a small ceremony in the station's garage. Medals for bravery were slipped over Ranger and Ghost's necks, though the dogs didn't care about the applause or the cameras. All they cared about was that Daniel was there, standing tall again, his hands resting on both of their shoulders. "They're not just K9s," Daniel said softly to the crowd. "They're family." And from that day on, no storm, no matter how fierce, would ever break that bond again. This story carries a powerful reminder about loyalty, trust, and the unbreakable bonds we form with those who stand by us in our darkest moments. Daniel's survival wasn't simply due to skill or luck. It was because Ranger and Ghost refused to give up, even when the odds were stacked against them. In life, we often face storms of our own times when the path ahead is buried, the world feels cold, and hope seems distant. In those moments, having someone who will push forward, who will not abandon you, can make all the difference. The lesson is twofold. First, be that loyal presence for others even when it's inconvenient or hard. True commitment often means running into the storm, not away from it. Second, allow yourself to trust and accept help. When it comes, sometimes survival depends on letting others stand beside you, whether it's in friendships, family, or the communities we build loyal.